If I could do anything, it would be to slow it all down, connect, talk, play, feel each other out. I hear a lot of educators this is not the way I want to teach. I want it to look different, but this is what I'm being told I have to do. And that is really, really stressful.
It is the job description of a teenager to push up against boundaries, to challenge, because every single time it guides them to understand a bit more about who they are.
One of the most powerful things that we can do is learn to listen well. Tell me more what's going on in your world, and listening without judging, without fixing, without correcting, just being there.
Podclass acknowledges the traditional and true custodians of the land we meet on here today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We're grateful to be here.
Today, we are thrilled to be welcoming Lael Stone to the podcast. Lael will be a familiar name and possibly even a familiar face for many of our listeners, but for those who might not have come across her work, she is a renowned speaker, educator and author, and her work is all about championing the emotional well-being and the authentic voices of children. She's been a guiding force for parents, educators and anyone working with young people, helping them to connect more deeply with the children in their lives and promoting emotional awareness at every stage. I did go to write a list of all the incredible projects and work and experience that Lael has, and I started to do this, but it would have gone for the entire length of the episode. So to just give you a few of the points, Lael's journey began in childbirth education and postnatal care. She's worked as a doula, a calm birth practitioner, and a postnatal trauma counsellor. She has run sex education programs for high school students, and she's co-hosted 123 episodes of the Aware Parenting podcast. She's also the visionary behind Woodline Primary, a school that places connection at the core of education. I think though, personally speaking, from being around Lael's work and implementing so many of her practices into my own education philosophies, what I love most is the authenticity that she brings to everything that she does. We are beyond thrilled to have her joining us on the podcast today.
So no one told you teaching was gonna be this way. Your lesson plans are jokes, your patience broke, you're feeling in disarray. It's like you're always stuck in report writing, when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your school year. But I'll be here for you
when the students start to riot.
I'll be here for you
even if your coffee's gone cold.
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.
Hello and welcome back to Podclass. We are so excited to be here today. We have a very special guest joining us. We have been listening and learning from this wonderful woman across multiple platforms for a very long time. But today we are very pleased to welcome Lael Stone into the studio. Hello, Lael.
Hi guys, I'm so happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you.
We are. We were just talking off air before we began about how we've just been so excited to have you and open up some really rich conversations for our audience around particularly supporting how they're connecting with students in their school settings. And we know that there's no one really better fitted, better suited to that than you. So we're very excited to have this conversation. But we would love to start, Lael, by just asking you, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What is it that keeps driving you to continue doing the work that you do in this space?
Oh, that's a good, beautiful, big, juicy question to start with.
We just thought we'd start off small, so
Something a bit casual. Why not?
I just feel so deeply passionate about helping humans know that they're enough, and especially children. Like, I think I've always been drawn to protecting children, but also wanting children to know right from the very beginning that they are enough just the way they are. And I think over the years, just working with thousands of adults and listening to people's stories and hearing the traumas that people go through, I know that everybody is doing the best job that they know how. I really do believe that. But I think so often we don't understand how we respond to children, how we react, the impact that has. So I think first and foremost, like, my big humanitarian heart is always like, how do I get people to understand? How can we help children to thrive? How do we create more peace kind of on this planet? I mean, and just to give you context, I was like this when I was like 5. I remember sitting my mum going, how am I going to stop people who are starving in the world? And my mom's like, "Hell, it's not your job." And I was like, "But how do I make a difference?" So I think I've always been like this, just this deep desire to, I don't know, to help people connect and to create a bit more love in the world, really.
Oh my gosh, we need you. And we need everything you're about, and we need everything you're doing and everything you're being. Thank you from us and our audience.
And also the world.
Yeah.
The future of the world. Copy and paste.
Yeah.
More of you.
Yeah. This episode is the one about meeting students where they're at.
Good.
And what we know is that, just through like learning and listening about what you preach and what you pioneer in your spaces, we know that really is so deep in your value set and in your drive, rather than presuming or assuming or manipulating young people to be somewhere we need them to be. It's about meeting them where they're at. Can you expand a little on that phrase, what that means to you, and also maybe how that plays out and how we can support meeting young people where they're at?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a beautiful point that you bring up straight away, of that we often come to children, whether as a parent or as an educator, with an idea of, I need you to just get in the car because we've got to go to the dentist, or I need you to just do this worksheet because I have to tick this off the list that you've done it. We come often with our agenda of what we need children to do. Now, as humans, nobody likes being controlled. Nobody likes being told what to do all the time. This is what it looks like. I mean, I remember one day picking up my daughter from school when she was 7, and I said to her, "How was your day today, darling?" And she looks at me, she goes, "I've been taking orders all day." And I was like, yeah, I guess that's sometimes what it can feel like, being told what to do all the time. So I think kind of stepping back a little bit, back to us as adults, that we have to firstly be aware of that we so often have an agenda of what we want to happen. Now, of course, we don't just give kids free range and go, "Oh, you just do life how you want." Like, the world is not going to function and work in that way. We have to offer guidance, but I think our job as adults is to constantly be tuning into other people, so other adults, but also children, to be like, where are they at in this scenario? Now, in order to do that, and this is the trickiest thing, we have to be present enough with ourselves to be able to tune into somebody else. So, ideally, and I talk about this, that when a child walks into the room, whether it's your own child or whether it's a student or, someone you're working with, we want to kind of do this little scan of them to be like, where are they in their bodies? What do I know about them, to feel into them in this moment, to know whether they're kind of in balance or whether they're out of balance? Like, where are they? Now, that takes a level of connection to be able to do that. So firstly, we have to have a relationship with that child to be able to go, gee, they're feeling a bit off today, I wonder what's going on. Or, whether we just have gotten to know them, that we're just sensing they're just not their chatty self. And so maybe something's happening here. So firstly, I think with us as adults, it comes back to being attuned enough within ourselves to be able to tune in and say what's happening. Now, I also have deep compassion that if you're a teacher and you have 28 kids and they all file into the room, you're not sitting there going, "Hang on, let me just check."
I just need to scan all of you. If you could just start again and enter one by one.
I know that that's not the reality, right? But where we can, in the best way possible, we want to be tuning into what we're feeling with these kids. And then we're sensing, well, where are they today? Am I watching that someone is really shut down and disassociated? And am I seeing that someone's really hyped up and there's a whole lot of energy going on? And ideally, I think the job is to be, how do we meet them where they're at? Which means, how can I meet them in the energy they are, to see what's going on, to hopefully assist or help them or guide them to bring them back into balance. So in the sense of, I'll talk about maybe primary school kids for a minute. You have some kiddos who walk into the learning space and they're kind of bouncing off the walls and they're all like this, and you're like, all right, there's a lot of energy in this body here that needs to move. What do we need to do before we can do any form of lowing? What do we need to do here? I need to help that child kind of come back into their body or move whatever's in that body. Do they need to go around the oval for a minute? Do they need to do some sensory stuff to bring them back into their body? Do we need to all come together kind of as a class and just bring our focus to our breath and kind of, where is our body feeling after we've been outside at recess and lunch and running around, and how do we anchor back in a little bit? Like, I think that's what we're looking at. Equally too, if we're tuning into a child who is looking pretty disconnected, disassociated, how do we bring them back into their body? And that might be through some really quiet connection. It might be through some drawing or some gentle touch or just something to bring them out to say, hey, there's safety here. You can be here.
Yeah.
So I think the job always, ideally as an adult, is to, where we can, tune into children to be like, where are they in these moments? And what do I know about them to bring them back into this connection point so that we can then move forward with whatever we need to do?
Yeah. And I've heard you speak about before, Lael, is that like young people often know what they need to do, that if we give them that autonomy in that moment to have some choice around that, whatever it is that they need to do, whether it is moving their bodies or taking some breaths or jumping up and down, whatever it might be. I think some of the concerns that we hear from educators, and I certainly know from my own experience in the classroom, is that the feeling of giving a young person maybe autonomy in that moment can feel like losing control as an educator, because I think sometimes we associate autonomy and giving students volition in that moment as being like
complete freedom.
That's complete freedom. You can do whatever you want. And I think that's not what autonomy is and what it means. And I think that's often confused. But what would you say, like, so if an educator's worried about that feeling of maybe if we are giving students that volition, we're providing them the opportunity to express what they need, how do we move past that need, I guess, within us, or to let go of that desire to have control in that space?
Oh, it's very hard.
Yeah.
But then you talk to parents about this. This is what they wrestle with every day too. And for me, it comes back to trust and relationship again. So in the context of what we do at Woodline at my school, we are always having this dialogue with children that says, what do you need to do to be ready for learning, right? And so some kids will be like, oh, I've got too many feelings in my body. And we're like, great, what do you need to do? They're like, I need to jump. I need to push something. I need to run. I need to do that. Some other children be like, I feel really sad. I need to just get a blanket, cuddle up in the corner for a little minute. Maybe they need some connection. And look, you know, we are fortunate enough that we have a lot of adults at our school and small class sizes, so we can bring some adult connection if needed when children need something. But ideally what we want to do as just a narrative is constantly, what do you need to do to learn? So let's get you firstly tuning into your bodies of what does your body need? What do you know about yourself? What do you know about how you learn best in order to be able to be ready to actually learn? So then what happens is then they know that they can actually say, I'm not ready yet. I need to go run for a minute, or I need to have something to eat, or I need to do this. Like they're aware enough of what's going on in their own systems to be able to do it, to come back into learning. And we still have boundaries about learning, you know. So often the fear educators say to me, but well, does that mean a child's like, they're going to take half an hour and they go, I'm still not ready. And I often say in the beginning, they kind of do, because they're like, oh, how far can I get away with this? Right?
Yeah, totally.
But then
we bump up against those boundaries.
Sorry, say that again.
We bump up against those boundaries.
Yeah. But then they actually, what they do is then they begin to see the whole group is actually learning, and then they begin to see, oh, maybe I'm missing out a bit. And then we do hold those boundaries. And then I think the whole thing too is the relationship is strong enough between the adult and the child that the adult knows when they're kind of, you know, taking the mickey out of something. You know, you can feel it. You sense, you know it, right? And so that's when we might bring a boundary and go, okay, that's enough now. But I think it always comes back to that mutual kind of respect that we have. And look, my belief system is this, is that children actually naturally want to do the right thing. They do. Yeah. There's just a lot that gets in the way. Yeah. Now, especially our schooling systems, particularly when we're really hardcore on you must do this and you must do that, and there's a lot of control, it doesn't give children much room to do anything except
just want to rebel against it.
Of course. You either be very good boy or good girl and you be very compliant, which often means we kind of shut ourselves down a little bit, or you just push back and be like, I'm not doing that. Now, we also know in those teenage years when it is all about identity and all those kind of things, like that's big, right? That's really big. And as a culture, what we do is we come in harder. If someone's pushing back, we're like, well, you need more on top of that. You know, you need more discipline. We're going to power over you, which again often creates even more disconnection. So I think coming back to that meeting where they're at is what engages this young person here? Yeah. What lights them up? What is their magic? If I was to look behind what I'm seeing here, who is this person and how can I draw the best out of them? Now, I also know that takes a bit of time, and we are very time poor in our system. And so, here is the big messy piece to it all of how do we make this happen and how do we create the change. But I think it starts by having these conversations, and it starts by shifting our mindset of not seeing children as bad or naughty or wrong, but just children that are trying to communicate something. I think if we as adults can firstly get that, it changes how we respond to children.
And I'm really curious, like from my perspective, every time anyone's tried to control me in school or I've been told to do something, I've always wanted to rebel against it because of the lack of autonomy. And I'm curious, in your opinion, like what is the long-term impact of rejecting giving our students any autonomy versus just giving it and nurturing them along the way?
Yeah, well, I think we reach a point where we feel like we've been controlled our whole lives. Either one of two things happen. One is we kind of acquiesce to that and just lose our own sense of power, and we often become very good boys or good girls where we constantly outsource to somebody else to tell us if we're enough and tell us if it's okay. So we lose that sense of who am I, and this is what I believe in, and this is what I want to stand for, because we become so conditioned to do the right thing, which is about whatever this authority figure says. So I've worked with a lot of adults who were very good boys and good girls, who were very compliant, which is what the system wants. And then they grow up to be adults and they have no idea about who they really are. And they feel very scared about taking risks, or they feel challenged about actually even speaking up or their opinion because they haven't had a practice learning how to do that. But also the younger parts of them are all about, I don't want to get in trouble here. Now, again, I have full compassion to our system because our system has been set up like this for a long time. Yeah. And I mean, I stand in this beautiful place with Woodline where we are able to do this because everybody's on board, because this is how our school is set up. I just have so much compassion for educators who are in systems where it is not the case. And I know that they might be listening to this going, yeah, that all sounds good in theory, but how do you do it? So I just want to say it's not easy. It's not just a 1, 2, 3 step will be sorted, right? Yeah. A lot has to happen and shift and change in our systems to allow more of this. But I think coming back to your question, Will, is that we either, when we don't have choice and autonomy, we learn to just not have any of it, and we kind of disconnect from that part of us until we reach a tipping point where we usually explode because we've had no control. Or if we do have choice and autonomy fostered within us, then I think what happens is when we get to explore all those parts of us and we feel free within that, we naturally want to do the right thing. Because when we feel connected to ourselves, we are in there. I want to help you, and I want to help mankind, and I want to, make a difference in the world, because we have the freedom within ourselves to do that, and we actually want to create that for others. So I think, that it's tricky, but I think that that's ideally what we want to do, and it doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries, particularly with children, but one of our big philosophies at Woodline is for children to be able to learn how to express themselves in a healthy way, to know that all ideas are welcome, to know how they learn best and give them the freedom to do that. And then they also have to learn what it is like to be part of a group. And sometimes we have to do stuff we don't particularly want to do. How can we bring the most joy to doing it? Or how can we do it in a way that supports the whole of the bigger picture here? So these are big lessons that we often have to teach children, but there are ways that we can do it, which is not about squashing their spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much of what you've just shared relates to a topic that's being raised with us so frequently at the moment. And this topic is around behaviours and behaviour management, quote unquote. And I'm just so curious around your philosophy, your opinion on, seemingly there's more and more pressures and external pressures on teachers through the system, on performance, on outcomes, and there's less and less time to be meeting young people where they're at, and there is nowhere near enough emphasis on actually tuning in, both ourselves as educators, but also tuning in and teaching young people and nurturing young people to tune in. What is your philosophy around, I guess, seeing this, perceived rise in quote unquote challenging behaviours from young people, in this
And probably prefacing that with that we know that young people don't wake up and come to school in their day and go, you know what, I'm really here to just piss off my teacher today. That's like, we know that that's not where that behaviour kind of comes from, that it's something that's going on internally. But we would love to hear, like, what are your thoughts on how we should be approaching that? Because obviously we can become activated ourselves in those moments as well.
100%. And I think you're superhuman if you don't become activated when you're up against it. I think.
And are there any of us in existence? I don't know.
Look, if I could do anything, it would be to slow it all down.
Yeah.
It would be to take the foot off the gas and the pressure, slow it all down, connect, talk, play, feel each other out. And we've done the opposite of that. We've just added more and we've created more pressure. And, you know, this is like any, I think, big systems that we live in, whether it's the medical system, the education system, whether it's politics. It often sometimes is dictated by people that aren't actually on the ground doing it. They're like, well, we're seeing this and this is what we need more of. And
right there.
Absolutely feel how challenging that is for educators. And that's what I hear a lot of educators is, this is not the way I want to teach. You know, I want it to look different. And but this is what I'm being told I have to do. And that is really, really stressful.
And the irony, with the fast paced isn't the pace of things, speeding it up, increasing the pressure, isn't enhancing outcomes, isn't enhancing well-being. In fact, we're seeing declines. So it just doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And I do wonder about, does it have to reach a tipping point? I mean, I feel like we are at a tipping point because we know that mental health is at an all-time crisis for young people. We know that they are stressed. We know that they're not doing well. And then we throw in, you know, the old stuff. We throw in social media. We throw in the comparison to the rest of the world. We throw in disconnection in the family unit, which I think is a massive thing as well, right? Where parents are stressed and busy because they're trying to earn money and keep up with everything. And then when they're not earning money, they're on their phones because we're all just checking out because we're too overloaded. And then we're not connecting as a family. And then kids are over here, especially teens, going, I still need you to see me. I still need you to turn up and connect with me. Even though I might look like I'm pushing you away, I need to know that you're there. Like this is so important. And I often say this to parents, you know, we need to be around when our kiddos are little, but then when they're teenagers, we got to come back again. Like it's almost like I found for me with my teenagers, I had to be there after school just to make them snacks. Because snacks are a really good way to have conversations. Who wants a snack plate? My kids are like, me. And so, you know, I was like, they needed to defrag about what was going on in their day, what was happening with friendships, relationships, the pressure of school, that kind of stuff. And a lot of teens are not getting that. And so what they're doing is they're turning to social media, they're checking out, they're turning to their peers instead of their family on some level. So we see, you know, there's a big disconnection going on. So I think all of those things contribute to, we then have kids turn up to school and they're told, right, you must do this, this and this. And then every single part of their being is like, I don't want to. This doesn't feel good. Like I'm not feeling seen and being able to be who I need to be. So I think that's the perfect storm that we're sitting in the moment. And again, how do we work with this? Well, I think it comes back to, again, if you are an adult working with kids, we have to be really mindful of the narrative that we have in our head. So if we're like, why are teenagers so difficult and they are so rude and they need to be taught a lesson.
Then we are speaking our language here, Lael.
Well, then you're never going to be able to meet that person with empathy and compassion and understanding if you've got this narrative that has already boxed these kids into something. So our first challenge is always we have to be curious, where am I in this story? What am I making this mean? Where am I at? And then if we were to ask ourselves a question, what would connection look like right now? What would connection look like with my group? What would connection look like with just this one person in front of me? And so much as there's all the big stuff, for me, one of the most powerful things that we can do is learn to listen well. It's just about having a conversation, going, tell me more what's going on in your world, and you're playing sport on the weekend, and what music are you listening to, and just listening without judging, without fixing, without, you know, correcting, just being there to be like, I hear you, because again, fundamentally, what we all desire as humans is to be seen and heard. And teenagers especially need a safe place to just be able to be like, this is what's going on in my brain. This is what's happening for me. And for an adult to sit there across from them being like, tell me more and tell me more. And thank you so much for sharing. And then that's it. No suggestions and no, this is what you should do, but just being a safe place for kids to land, I think we can't underestimate how powerful that is.
As the tokenistic young person in the conversation, very, very strongly agree. And like meeting young people where they're at is not like trying to use the Gen Z language. Yeah. Like that's not, and trying to fit into this like, yes, I'm cool. Like that's not meeting young people where they're at. It's literally just having conversations. And having compassion with us as well is all we are.
That authentic connection, coming from a place of curiosity, not making judgments on them, judging ourselves, just holding space for each other to just be. And like, Lael, what you said about just taking time to slow down and connect and to just be with whatever it is that we're experiencing. I just wish like if you could inject one thing into every classroom, across Australia, across the world, creating moments for educators to know it's okay to do that with their young people in their class and provide that space. So then it's also not creating these really amped up young people who are heading home and having to have explosions with their parents because they're being supported. It's that whole wraparound effect. And I mean, it sounds like Woodline obviously does that so beautifully. I mean, if I ever come back into teaching, I'll definitely be hitting up Woodline.
I almost want a job. Or actually, I want to attend. I'll be a student. I'll go back to school. I'll finish.
I love the idea of challenging the assumption that, like looking at teenagers specifically, because you're getting older, therefore you're getting more mature, therefore you're more and more and more and more on track. Well, you're 16 now, so we should know it is the job description of a teenager to push up against boundaries, to challenge, situations and environments, because every single time it guides them to understand a bit more about who they are, about their volition, about what they want. And I think we have to shift our mindset around, the older you get, the more you show up within this tick box situation. No. The boundaries are love. And if they're pushing up against boundaries, they need the boundaries and they're asking for the boundaries.
And I think we forget too, like I was the Year 9 coordinator for the last few years at my school. And our, they're 14, 15-year-old young people, but they look like 18, 19, 20. And we forget like these are teenagers. They're not adults. And yet we have these expectations that they're going to show up with the emotional regulation and capacity to do all of that like an adult, and they're just not there.
You think about one of the classic lines, and I remember thinking this as a teenager myself, when we mess up, which we're meant to as teenagers, because as you say, we're learning, and the adult goes, I'm very disappointed in you. Right? It's like this crushing, like
flashbacks.
Flashbacks,
it was the worst thing ever. And I often say to adults of parents of teenagers all the time, when you were 15 and you messed up because, you just did, what did you actually really want from your adult in that moment? Like what would you have deeply wanted from your parent? Now, ideally, I know that most of us would have wanted a parent or a teacher who could sit there and go, oh, you made a mistake. All right, let's break it down. Right. And not make you wrong and not shame you, not pull out the disappointed card, but just like, tell me more about this. I'm curious. And what have we learned from this? And what do we take forward in that moment? Because I think, the part about boundaries is so true. Teenagers are going to look to push up against boundaries for a few reasons. One, sometimes they need a boundary to push up against because they're looking for a safe place to discharge that massive backpack of feelings that they're carrying around. And you guys know, you work with them all the time. Being a teenager is so rough. Like it's just one of the hardest times in our lives, right? And we've got all this angst about, am I beautiful enough? And am my muscles big enough? And does that person like me? And am I smart? What am I meant to do with my life? And all the things.
And who am I?
And then what we need is sometimes that pressure builds, and sometimes we are going to do something stupid, or we're going to look for a boundary to push up against to offload all those feelings and worries that we're carrying. It's so much like a toddler who gets upset because you give them the blue cup instead of the red cup. It's really often the same with teenagers, that you ask them to take the dog for a walk and then they just explode, and it's not about the dog, right? It's about everything else going on. Now, what they're looking for in that moment is there an adult that is rock solid enough who can see behind my behaviour here and go, I hear you, mate. yeah, you know, I take the dog for a walk, but I'm thinking something else is going on, and can stand in the fire with them and not shame them, not make them wrong, but just be like, I'm here. Come on, keep going. What else? Because that teenager is constantly looking for, is there someone anchored enough in their own being to be able to hold my fire lovingly so I can let it all out and then come back into my center? That is what kids are constantly scanning for. They do it as little kids. They do it as teenagers. They're tuning into the adults to go, who can I bring my fire to and who could hold it, right? Or who can I trust enough to share the deeper pain that is sitting there? And that always comes through us reading each other's bodies, right? That comes through because they're sensing, I can sit with this stuff. And a lot of the time that's because as adults, we've done enough of our own work to be like, I remember what that was like, and I understand, I have that emotional intelligence, that when a child is acting up, our first thought's got to be, they're having a hard time. They're waving a red flag here. My job is to meet them, not make them wrong, and go, hey, I'm going to bring enough safety to you so we can move what's sitting there so we can get to the bottom of what's going on.
I think
louder for the people at the back.
Louder for the people at the back. But that is such a beautiful spot to kind of wrap up as just a reminder of, it's just our job to meet young people where they're at. We're not coming in to solve all their problems and to wave a magic wand and make it all okay. We're just there as those guiding pillars of support to hold space for young people to step into whoever they are, whoever they need to be in that moment, and to just meet them exactly where they're at.
And have their meaningful conversations and ask the questions that actually matter.
Yeah. And Lael, if you could wrap up this episode, the one about meeting young people where they're at, with 2 or 3 simple tips, and I know they're things we've chatted about throughout the episode, that we can implement in the little moments, what would they be?
What's your thoughts, as in what you make it mean about the person in front of you? So if we can, what would be the most generous interpretation of what is happening here? And again, I always come back to, if you're working with kids, remember, no child feels good hurting another child or being mean to someone else. We're always coming from protection. So if we can always kind of look at that person in front of us as, what am I seeing here? I think the second thing is listen, and listen more, and just and do a lot of nodding. Just a lot of nodding. And then at the end of them talking, just say, thank you so much for sharing with me. Like, just to give them the space to go, you are a safe place. I'm a safe place for you to bring all this stuff. So I'd be watching our thoughts, I'd be listening, and then I would be taking care of us, because it's very hard to turn up and hold that space for children or for anyone if we are not getting our needs met as well. It's actually impossible to do. When we're stressed, when we're stretched, when we've got a whole lot of our own stuff going on, it's very hard for us to turn up and bring that empathy and compassion. So we have to take care of us in the bigger picture as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lael. And thank you for joining us. And we will see you next week on Podclass.
And Lael will be here next week too.
She will.
Bye.
Bye.
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.
Thanks so much for tuning into Podclass. If you've enjoyed this episode, we would adore it if you could go on to Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. 5 stars would be lovely. We would love to get this podcast into as many ears as possible so we can help and support as many people as possible who help young people. And if you're not already doing so, please go along to Instagram and follow us at podclass.aus.